It's a pleasure to be here and to share what I consider to be a much needed conceptual overview in this time of our what we call our intelligence age. Uh, I'll throw this on the screen right now. All right. So the whole genesis of this presentation has to do with really a chain of presentations that I've been asked to make to demystify what this era of generative AI is all about. Effectively, in every single case, folks had a tough time orienting themselves, understanding which way is up. And this dawned on me in terms of this visualization that I'm about to take you through, which pulls together a number of different dimensions. And the dimensions have to do with not just the time frame of progression, but also the applicability of human oversight over time, as well as the automation potential or the automation complexity over time. And effectively, it presents what I consider to be an atlas of sorts. And effectively, that's what I chose to label it as, this atlas of our intelligence age, to contextualize much of what's been happening in the news around generative AI, and much of how to orient yourself as a business owner, for example, a person who is always looking ahead to identify opportunities, to make sense of everything that's happening, and then to plan appropriately or be prepared for what's to come. So I'll start here, where we begin this progression around 2018. So at this point in 2018, this is before the generative AI gold rush, before ChatGPT came on board. At this point in 2018, there were AI models that were utilized primarily by search engines. Google's BERT model was very efficient at this point in time in terms of indexing search pages, understanding text well enough to categorize it. The level of AI that we had at this particular point in time is what I would consider to be deterministic automation related AI. So that's the period that we built upon. And you'll find that as we progress towards the center, the era or period that's highlighted here is built upon or improved upon with the next period thereafter, but it also inherits everything that came about thereafter. So in this deterministic automation period, effectively, we're looking at deep learning models that came about to help us to do a lot of predefined processing tasks. As I mentioned in the example of Google's BERT models, to be able to process and index your search pages very efficiently. And these were based on rules and patterns defined in the training data set. These models were very good at understanding connections on that level, but they were not able to process any context like the more modern models that we'll see. And it was able to get certain things done in a visual sense or in a textual sense. And some examples of this, as I mentioned, search engine indexing and ranking, we had models that were able to do that at that level of scale. They were very mechanistic in nature. That's another aspect to it. So we could do a lot of large scale data analysis, trend spotting with these models, as long as they were trained up well enough. We could process procedural content. We can also do simple optimization processes in these logistics networks, for example, calculating the most efficient shipping routes. Things like these were actually occurring at this particular era around 2018, thereabout. And some examples are included here in the map with regards to what industries had actually applied and found great success in. An example of this is Atlas AI's Aperture platform detected warehouse construction hotspots via satellite imagery. So this is computer vision related activities, and there are more here. Now, progressing onwards, we entered into the end of 2022 when ChatGPT came on stream, and everything shifted at this particular point in time. This is the era that actually began what we consider to be the intelligence age shifting from our information age, where we realized that OpenAI was able to take a transformer-based model, turn it into something that was actually useful and amazing, and had this beautiful way to generate responses based on context. And it shifted the entire industry. Some would argue that everything was reset. Industries were reset. Now, at that time, we were practicing within this particular space. We used LSTM type models, the older models, not the transformer-based models that OpenAI would have popularized at this point in time. The amount of engineering in terms of data preparation and training that went into that required an immense amount of manpower. What we realized when these models came on stream and then became commercialized is that our teams were reduced to 25% in terms of the manpower, and the time was even further reduced in terms of delivering the same quality of work that we would have otherwise had to employ with the older models. So you'll find that the era that OpenAI ushered in through these commercialized models, many would identify with the ChatGPT emergence, changed everything. So we as a technology firm had to relearn. So everything that went before that we considered mainstream, we had to pretty much set aside and relearn this new technology paradigm, which came with the generative AI model. So that's from the technological perspective, and it rippled forward into industry as well. So this is what we consider to be the superhuman execution phase. Because right now, transitioning from the older models, which were more deterministic and mechanistic, these models were able to understand what they actually processed. They were able to process context. So it actually closed the gap between the deterministic era and what we could do with data now, which closed the gap between how a human would look at information and how a machine would process it. So in this era, we were able to leverage more human-like processing of data because of the context it was able to interpret and then the information that it was able to generate. And again, this is the reset era where it came to generative AI. So in this particular case, we could apply vast data sets, even more complex pattern recognition scenarios without pre-training or without spending hours on prepping the models. Simply by directing the models with a prompt, we were able to accomplish the same things in the previous era in a fraction of the time and with a fraction of manpower. And even more things that we didn't at this point in time really discover that we can do with these types of models. So effectively, what captures this period is human-like processing of vast amounts of information with contextual awareness. And the models came with parametric knowledge, which means that it had facts about the entire world because it read the entire internet. But we can put these things to work at superhuman speed and scale. And that led to us doing real-time accurate language translations. That was a cinch because these models were pre-trained and reinforced on a number of different languages. They could, on the fly, translate things. We were able to see massive scale content generation. So these are, again, considered generative models as opposed to the older models that they came from, where the information itself, textual information in particular, could be generated in a cogent manner so that it can be meaningful as output to be used in various scenarios. We saw also algorithmic trading, these models being able to, again, through the possibility of understanding context, it was able to look at certain data sets, the changing of data sets, and reflecting on its own parametric knowledge, as well as any additional prompts and contextual knowledge to be able to make inferences and recommendations in that regard. And of course, using the same context capability that came in with this period, it was able to do proper predictive maintenance in the case of the industrial sector. So shifting over here within the superhuman execution period, we see in industry actual cases where this Swedish fintech Klarna, they were able to build an agent that was able to handle the same amount of work that 700 human agents was able to handle. And they did it autonomously and cut $40 million from their yearly spend. And we see also in the energy sector, so Shell employed this particular new era of models, and they were able to process 20 billion data rows weekly, reducing equipment failures by 40% and saving 1.2 billion in downtime costs. And there are a number of other examples here that we can go through. Now, the superhuman execution era was the dawn of the implementation of these generative AI models. And that progressed in such a manner to naturally give rise to this symbiotic co-creation period. Now, this is where it happened around 2023. This is where AI agents became more and more commonplace. So at this level, individuals were implementing applications and implementing these commercialized models within their applications. And engineers realized that it was such a utility, and there was such a demand to create even more complex architectures that agentic AI architectures came about. Now, for those of you who haven't heard about AI agents before, an agent is effectively a combination of a computer program and a language model, or a series of language models that allow a certain workflow and allow pre-programmed logic to employ these language models or other types of generative AI models in meaningful ways, so as to automate at a superhuman scale data processing and interpretation of information to assist in the day-to-day activities or operational activities of professionals in industry, for example. And agentive systems have, at this particular point in time, become a utility. So we see attributes such as the ability for humans and agents to work in tandem. Because at this point in time, thankfully to the evolution of generative AI models to close the gap between what it's able to process and how humans are able to process it, we're actually seeing through the agentive systems the meaningful application of agents, AI agents, in scenarios or spaces where humans otherwise would have employed their skills and their time. So it wasn't perfect, and it still isn't perfect at this point in time, but it was able to create such an impact that it ushered in this idea of symbiotic co-creation, where those who would have employed these AI agents in their operational needs would have identified that there's a lot of meaning, there's a lot of productivity boosts that can be derived from working along with the agents to cut the amount of overhead, cut the amount of time and the complexity in terms of their operations, even augment things and allow a fewer number of individuals to accomplish the same thing that a great team of individuals were able to accomplish by virtue of having the AI work as a team member, for example. So simple, broad-based examples of the employing of AI agents and agentic systems in this symbiotic co-creation era can be found in AI-assisted drug discovery, generative design and engineering to understand particular needs and directions, and then generate various combinations or variations of actual designs to be identified and then curated by human beings. We also have personalized education platforms where we have the advent of AI tutors working with teachers to assist students in their comprehension and their absorption of the particular subject matter. And then we also have advanced data journalism, where we see these research-related agents and the agents that monitor the current affairs being able to present potential leads for stories and things of that nature. So moving over here in terms of actual current events, we see also this advent of agents bleeding their way back into the technology sector And I dropped a link here, which is very interesting. We have agents now that are able to write very high quality code. And this is an article that highlights that Microsoft's 30% of Microsoft's code is now written by AI. There is also a report as of recent where 41% or over 41% of the code across GitHub. So GitHub is this repository. It's free to developers across the world. We use it in our development to hold all of the code and allow developers to contribute to code and maintain code. So GitHub's analyzed that 41% of the code within its repositories across all the owners is generated by AI. And so we have AI being proficient and working in tandem with developers to generate code in the cloud. In addition to that, we have sales and customer service. So this is where we see AI agents on these agentive systems taking off and being able to stand in the gap between the human customers and the business. And in this particular case, out of this article, we see that contact centers, AIs are able to handle 85% of query resolution across contact centers. Again, this is all by virtue of the AI's evolution through the language models to being able to understand context and operate at that scale, and then having the agentive architectures that power them to deliver to our particular realm in a meaningful way. And I mentioned the software development. And over here, we have indications of AIs in healthcare as well, financial services, and the like. And this is an interesting article from, this is recent in Texas. Because of the AI tutors intervention, working in tandem with the actual human school teachers, they were able to improve test scores by about 22% in terms of their employing of AI agents. Now, this is a unique thing because there is also the flip side to this where students may be using generative AI to produce reports. This is a very good example with regards to the way that the education system can adapt and embrace generative AI towards the end of achieving its original goal, which is to create better students and producers at the end of the day. Moving on, further in, after the symbiotic co-creation period, we see this human-led creativity period. And we're actually in the midst of this period. We've actually just broken through to this particular point in time, but there's lots to be expected beyond this. And what this period captures is the ability for humans and AIs not to just work together, but to have humans introduced to the AI, which has now become even more capable of generating artifacts that is at the level of human quality or beyond, in order to produce meaningful outcomes or outputs. We see a lot of that happening on social media with influencers, for example, who are using generative AI models such as Google Veo 3 to produce these very realistic videos with sound inspired by human direction and human creativity. So at this particular period, which we've just broken through into, the models have now become more adept at generating things that we would otherwise have to generate ourselves or create ourselves with very, very large teams. And in this particular case, it's being able to do that with relative ease, exceptional speed, and exceptional quality. And we see examples of this in AI image generation for artists. So artists are now using these models. Designers are now using these models, fashion designers, for example, to create variations of what they feel could be a possible next delivery on their part. And they're working with the models, only inserting their creative genius, which obviously at this point in time, the AI is unable to really master, and using the abilities of these models to generate at human level quality or beyond the artifacts that result in their particular creative direction. The music industry is also impacted and inspired by this particular evolution of the models to be able to produce musical scores, even vocals. But again, all of this is still prompted. Some examples of this in the news, we see the Google Veo 3 takeoff. And again, this is exceedingly popular on social media by the influencers, in software development even. So there's such a thing now they call vibe coding, where, you know, I can have an idea for an app, and without writing any code whatsoever, I can work along with an AI, or rather an agentive system that takes my directives and then generates the code for the app, previewing its outputs for me to evaluate and then further direct the AI towards a particular output and a complete application. So this is now an actual methodology that's used in some of the biggest tech companies right now, vibe coding. And as a result, it's disrupting the labor market when it comes to even developers, because what you find is that these models have now become so adept at generating code upon direction that these tech companies are laying off developers because they don't need such a large team any longer. And I dropped this in here because it gets very close. So if you would have been following the progression, let me just zoom out a little bit. If you would have been following the progression, we move from more of a reliance that is very low on human involvement. So this is this axis here. And we're progressing consistently towards a high reliance on human involvement. So at this particular point in time, the human-led creativity, even though the models are so capable, they still need that depth of emotion that human beings bring to the table in order to direct them to produce what they've produced. And in addition to that, we also see that it's becoming harder and harder to automate as we progress towards this, what I consider the holy grail of creative genius that we embody. So within this particular realm, we are still king. We are still the masters of this particular realm. There is no technology, at least to my knowledge, or no model to my knowledge, that is able to replicate human consciousness, that is able to replicate the imagination and the intuition that we bring to the table and translate for these models in order to produce what they've produced. And that's why, as we progress towards the center of this, we find that automation complexity increases. Other sub aspects of this would be human oversight will obviously need to increase, because these models are now becoming more and more powerful. And as they become more and more powerful, we have situations such as evaluating their outputs and their capabilities, evaluating the ethical aspects or ethical implications of their capabilities. And so we see a lot of a higher reliance on human ethics being introduced to direct and curate what the models actually do. We see a requirement on human trust. So at this particular point, humans are being marginalized to some degree with regards to their involvement in what they produce. As a result, they have to, in order to employ anything at this tier, they have to trust the models. They have to trust the technology more in order to really get a desired output and an outcome. And then, of course, you've got this increase in human-like cognition. So I'll zoom in on this center here, which is our creative genius, our holy grail. This is what all of the big tech companies are after when they talk about AGI. And it's a situation whereby it's a territory that it's a big question mark in my mind with regards to when. Some say in 20 years, maybe in less, when we're able to evolve this level of aptitude in the AI models that we have at present to replicate at scale human genius. And just to dive in a bit more in terms of what that really means, pure human genius is is a different beast altogether based on what these models are built upon. These models are still ultimately driven by logic, rationality. Human genius has been proven to be unpredictable. And that's the interesting thing. But because of that unpredictability, we have this profound originality. We have, leaps in intuition. And some examples are Einstein's theory of relativity. There was no data, nothing that preceded anything to lead Einstein to identify that there may be a possibility with regards to his theory of relativity. It was a hunch that he had. It was an instinct. Can AIs at some point in the future replicate that leap without data sets? And it's a very difficult thing given the architecture that we have at present driving these models. Even though they can replicate or emulate rather, much of the things, they are still bounded to the data and the particular goals and procedures and weights that they've been programmed by. So it's a very tough particular problem to solve. Other examples are, inserting character depth, like in terms of Shakespeare's writing, as well as these paradigm shifts. Anything that will stray, completely force an individual to understand that there is a pre-existing collection of information, but not base their new theories upon it, is a tough problem for these models based on their architecture at present. So what I've also included here are tools that fall within the realm of human-led creativity, such as I mentioned Google Veo 3. There's also CDance, there's Pika Labs. And within this particular arena of symbiotic co-creation, there are AI architectures and agentive systems such as Landgraph. This is the open source system that we've worked on at V7-5. We have a full agentive stack that we're open sourcing so that we can actually build these very powerful agentive systems that work with multiple models and the like. And what I'll do right now is share this link with everyone in the group so that you can hop in and have a view of your own with the particular diagram here. All right. Okay, so I've shared a link there in the chat. Feel free to hop in. And the idea here is with this region that's left open, it was left open deliberately because this is a work in progress. But the idea is really to capture across the different dimensions to give individuals an insight into where we've come from, the progression that is going to take us forth, what is currently happening, what is notable within the particular period, what it's built upon, in order for us to really capture and understand this generative intelligence era within which we live. So with that, I'm going to also introduce some useful links over here. This captures a link to my bio so you can find out a bit more about me. This is a Calendly link if you want to have a conversation about these types of philosophical or technical things. This is our company website. And this is a very simple AI that exists on WhatsApp that you can scan and chat with, that we have as our publicly accessible AI. Her name is Iris. So with that, I will allow questions and conversations on this particular perspective. Thanks.
Thank you so very much, Eldon. This was really, really an incredible presentation this morning. Is it okay if I ask you to stop share at this moment so we can engage in the Q&A? And I want to say that I learned so much from yesterday's opening ceremony and the presentation from our opening keynote as well. And your presentation today simply enhanced that tremendously.
Wonderful.
And I'm so grateful for all these learnings that we are getting here. Now, I want to just present a very important consideration for us, which was raised at yesterday's opening ceremony. And this is with these AI agents that are making decisions. The question was asked, who becomes accountable for harmful decisions? Because I know you did not touch on that aspect of the generative AI today, Eldon, but with all these wonderful, amazing things that we have, and we embrace them because definitely it's changing our world, and in many ways, it is changing it for the better. But there are huge implications as well if the person who is writing the prompts and given the instructions happens to do so from a mindset that is not meant for the best outcome for everyone.
No, absolutely. And if I may, I'll preface this by saying that the technology, although very, very advanced and almost magical, is still under our directive. So effectively, it is still programmable. It cannot act on its own volition, even though it may seem to generate things on its own volition. It still requires our initial activation, our initial prompt, our initial direction. As a result, it is my opinion that whatever is produced is ultimately under the ownership and under the responsibility of the individual or the entity that has directed the AI to produce it. So similarly, just a simple analogy, it's an oversimplification actually. We wouldn't consider that a pen has any rights to what is written on a paper, on a sheet of paper, for example. It is the individual that wields the pen that is ultimately responsible and for whatever the pen produces, in spite of it being a writing instrument.
Oh, that is used, yes.
Right.
Understood.
And in terms of identifying I guess there are certain ramifications. Whose hands, depending on whose hands the AI falls into, we can use the analogy of a weapon or a gun.
Mm-hmm.
So there's law enforcement that uses it to ensure that they maintain peace and order, whereas there are criminals that use it to do the opposite. And AI can be seen as a similar implement. And then finally, I consider what's happening right now if they were back eons ago when they discovered fire, if they were documenting that they had discovered fire and, they're trying to understand fire, I would relate to what's happening right now with generative AI and our intelligence age as the modern day discovery of fire. There is potential good that can come out of it. Smelting, the hardening of materials and other production trajectories. However, if it's used in a different way, there is immense tragedy that can come out of it. So I'll leave that.
No, I agreed. And I think you handled that really well. It reinforces for all of us to recognize the importance of us taking responsibility and taking charge still of the decision-making process. The scary part, though, Eldon, is as you went through the whole development stages of AI and where it has reached now, this notion that human beings are being marginalized because to a great extent we have to trust the technology because it knows more than us. That increases the risk. So there's a greater need for us to ensure that humans are educated.
Absolutely.
So, right. Now, is your community having that conversation that alongside the tech developers, that policymakers are understanding the implications of all of these and to ensure that those foundation systems are being put in place for the benefit of human civilization?
Not at the scale that I'd like at this point in time, but there are initiatives which are moving in the right direction. in terms of closing the exposure gap on what we have before us. But it's a matter of ramping that up in strategic ways so that we make good on this era. There are individuals among us still. Just yesterday, I was at a forum and there are individuals who refuse to use AI simply because they're driven by certain fear-based decisions about it. And that is as a result of the exposure gap that we have at present. So we need more forums like these in order to close that gap and help us to understand where we stand with regards to the technology in its current state.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. So I'm just checking the chat quickly, but I want to let persons know that if they have a question, that they can raise their hands. Just note that we are about 10 minutes away from close time, so really wouldn't want anyone to hug the light. There is a question from Novak. He shared, if AI is simply a tool, accountability lies at the user level. Okay, so it's actually just a comment to the question that I had given to Eldon, which is who really is accountable for harmful decisions. Okay, so yeah, if anyone else, I'm seeing, people did appreciate your contribution, Eldon. So if there are any other questions, please let us know. But Eldon, this idea of being able to, let's say, even create an app by giving it instructions as to what you want. So you don't need to know any coding. It really opens organizations to tremendous opportunities for qualities of efficiencies which they would not otherwise have, especially the small and medium enterprises and so. So how then do we close that gap, which you mentioned earlier? Because there are several concerns. First of all, is the harmful effects, and there would always be bad actors among us. So we will always have to pay attention to that. But as you drew the analogy to the use of fire, just think what life would have been like if we all chose not to use it.
Exactly. That's the thing. I mean, the thing is, right now in our era, just like, maybe our ancestors did when they discovered fire, we will walk both paths. We have to walk both paths. But ultimately, our instinct to survive and persist should prevail. So while we are in an era where we are a bit more critical as to what's happening to us, so that we can avert certain disasters that are a bit more obvious to us, we can't avert all of them. But ultimately, I believe our human nature will prevail to ensure that there is this self-organization that happens, and we choose the path that is more progressive, ultimately, with the technology. So ultimately, what I'm saying is that the new version of fire that we have, we'll have to experiment with it. We'll get burned some of the time, but ultimately, hopefully, we'll learn from this, and over time, we'll wield it as we should.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then my question to you, Eldon, as someone who is a tech expert, you have executives in the room who have concerns in terms of whether they should use it, but you are convincing us it should be. What would your advice be in terms of what strategy they should employ?
Hire an expert. Find an expert that understands this technology and that is able to reliably close your confidence gap, that is able to close your exposure gap with this technology, and you will ensure that you are ahead of the curve. Responding within a fear-based manner to the technology, in terms of like, let's just hold off on this, or it's a hands-off, is going to cost you time in this era that you do not have to spare. You need to find the right people, find the right forums, close the confidence gap, close the exposure gap. Once you're able to assume that position of awareness, then you can make those strategic decisions, because it is a force for good as long as you're able to see the path.
Okay, that sounds like great advice, because it definitely means that you would have a measure guidance. We in fact have been encouraging that boards should ensure that there's someone who understands the technology, also available on the board itself, if not, an advisor to guide them. So
Yes.
I really appreciate that. Now let's look at the other side of it now. In yesterday's panel discussion, the question also came up about education for the workforce, preparing this generation for dealing with the changes. So if there are young people who are listening to you now, what would your advice be to them in terms of how to get started in being able to not just understand, but contribute effectively today?
So, for every single young person listening, my advice is that your future, whether you prefer it or not, is going to be a tech-infused, tech-powered, tech-saturated future. So anything that you can do at this point in time to become more aware and supplement your knowledge with regards to tech and the technologies of our time, then you take that opportunity. If there's a course that relates to Python programming or exploring using language models in meaningful ways, or even just understanding basic concepts relating to tech, you need to jump on that. School systems need to adapt in order to bring those concepts into the schools as early as they possibly can, because this is spreading unlike anything that we've seen, and many others have commented on it. It's an era that is again, this is our intelligence era, and it's growing at a rate, which means that in order to really survive in the future, we have to adapt, starting with our youth, to ensure that when they come out and they're ready for work, they have no gaps. It's not a mystery whatsoever with regards to the tools of our time. They are ready and willing intelligence workers, not knowledge workers, to go and wield this technology in meaningful ways.
Right, and I appreciate that advice very much, Eldon, and it's something that we would share as well, because executives have a responsibility to ensure that the next generation understand what is required of them as well, so they can get started. Edward Millington has shared in the chat that there are AI management systems that can help. And I guess this would be in guiding companies with respect to yes, even risk management frameworks to build awareness. So, and CISO has its own framework. So there are areas where people can go and there are tools available. Because from what I'm seeing, based on your presentation today, Eldon, there's absolutely no industry that is untouched.
That's
There's
correct.
a sector that has not already been affected by AI.
And even
What
more profound, if I may, even more profound, there will be emergent sectors that will be born out of this technology. We're seeing that as we see. So effectively, the sectors that will come about thereafter will be born out of this era. Yeah. So everything is inextricably tied to it. Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that I absolutely loved in your presentation was where you pointed out the intuition gap as well. So there are still some elements that is retained by humans, but I was curious about the parts that you left bare. So is this the area that you were saying that new things would happen that we have not yet started to see, or is
Of course.
this
So in the bottom left quadrant of the diagram, I would have shared the link earlier in the chat. I'm welcoming the community to share, particularly things when it comes to risk. The negative aspects, for example, I particularly left that out on purpose, just for the sake of time. So any other instances in the news or any thoughts that you might have, feel free to comment that within the particular band in that bottom left sector of the diagram.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any hand raised, so I will therefore ask the final question. Because you helped develop some of these systems, Eldon, would you be able to advise if there are audit trails that are built into the system so that when challenges do happen, there's a way that you can identify to assess for liability?
Well, absolutely. That is a standard that we need to build towards. So even before building AI-related systems, enterprise systems need to have audit trails. So we've inherited that standard from the era before. But what's happening more so now is that within these AI-based systems, because everything is conversational, you have even more information that needs to be tracked and traced at the conversational level, not just for ensuring that the AI stays within the guardrails, but to also further improve upon the experience for the users. So that's a standard without a doubt.